Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at one of ASIC's largest stability running shoes. I'm talking about the ASICS GEL-Kayano 32, so let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say that these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports, however no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Like I said at the start of the video, the GEL-Kayano 32 is ASIC's largest stability running shoe. Great for runners that want the most amount of cushioning possible, with also some additional medial support to keep your foot from rolling to the inside. Now you're probably wondering, Ryan, what's the neutral version of the GEL-Kayano? Well, that would be the Gel Nimbus, another one of my kind of top favorite max cushion shoes. It's really comfortable. And then if you're someone who wants some medial stability, but also in a shoe that maybe isn't as large as this one here, you can look at the GT 2000, which is a more moderately cushioned ASICS stability shoe. So I hope that makes sense. So basically, if you want the largest and most cushioned stability shoe with medial support from ASICS, you're looking at the Kayano 32. The shoe costs $165, and they actually added more foam to this midsole. There's 2 more millimeters of stack height in the forefoot, which brings us to a grand total of 40 millimeters in the heel and 32 in the forefoot for a new 8 millimeter drop. Previously, on the prior version, it had a 10 millimeter drop with 40 in the heel and 30 in the forefoot. So a slight tweak here and a slightly more cushioned forefoot experience on the 32nd edition. Now, despite the increase in size to the midsole, it actually gets about 5 grams lighter, now coming in at 10.5 ounces or 298 grams, which isn't honestly too bad considering how massive this shoe is. Moving on to the upper, the shoe fit true size for me, a fairly standard plush premium ASICS experience here. You do have a slight taper to the toe box. The one, I guess, maybe drawback I would say about this upper is the breathability wasn't amazing. It was, I'd say, maybe slightly below average. It's a fairly warm upper here. If we move on to the tongue, it is very thin. You have some large holes, which I think do give you some additional ventilation in the center of the shoe. It is gusseted on both sides and then has some small foam blocks as you get towards the top. I really like this implementation. Kind of reminds me of the tongue we see on the Nova Blast 5. And then of course we have a tongue pull tab, which is just always a nice touch. It's also a fairly shallow tongue as well, so it doesn't come up too far, which I do very much appreciate. And then if we go towards the back of the shoe, it's very much like the Nimbus, very plush and premium, a ton of padding here with a large heel pull tab that is very stretchy. Unlike the Nimbus, it doesn't have that collar around the ankle and Achilles section, and the heel counter itself is very stiff and rigid, which I think is important on a stability shoe. I was really happy with the lockdown and fit. Didn't feel like my foot was going anywhere. I felt very kind of in tune with this stability platform. Very plush, premium, comfortable overall feel. The only minor complaint I have, again, is the breathability of the upper. I wish they used what they did on the Nimbus. It's a much more kind of simplified and thin mesh, which has much better airflow. But otherwise, I think that's just kind of a small complaint in the grand scheme of things. The midsole has a whole lot going on with it just because there's so many different components that work together to deliver that stable and well-structured ride. So I'll do my best to explain all of them in detail. Now, most of the foam is going to be Flight Foam Blast Plus, and ASICS does tweak this in every different iteration. So just because you see Flight Foam Blast Plus doesn't mean it's the same kind or same sensation in every shoe. And a great example of this is the Kayano feels much firmer and stiffer compared to the Nimbus, which has a much softer and slightly bouncier feel to it. And then on the medial side, we have this kind of puck of darker green foam, which they call their 4D guidance system, or at least that's where they put the labeling. The 4D guidance system refers to all the different components that give you that stable ride, but essentially this kind of puck of green foam or darker green foam is going to be a bouncier, springier foam, which kind of keeps your foot from rolling inwards and kind of bounces back and offers a tad bit medial support. It's kind of a unique take on a posting system. And then we also have an asymmetrical midsole sculpting setup as well, where basically on the lateral side you have these grooves and indentations, and on the medial side it's much more filled in, which means you have easier lateral compression compared to medial compression, again helping provide that medial support. Then you also have an insanely wide heel bevel, just giving you a ton of surface area to land on, and an insanely wide platform overall, just giving you more inherent stability. So it is a massive aggressively wide shoe. You have a ton of ground contact here. And then finally, you have some pretty substantial foam sidewalls on both the lateral and medial side, which kind of keep your foot contained and going in the correct direction. And all these different components work together to deliver a very, very supportive ride. If you need a solid amount of support, I think the Kayano is the way to go, just because of how many different stability features are implemented with this shoe. Now, as a fun side note, the women's version of the Kayano actually has even more internal structure, which they call 3D space construction. And yes, that is completely separate from the 4D guidance system. So let me explain. Basically, and ASICS has done this on their prior stability models. There's an internal structure that's kind of incorporated into the midsole that collapses in a strategic way to give even more support. Basically, some parts of the midsole offer more resilience and other parts give way a little bit easier. And that's all kind of engineered in a very specific way to help give even more stability. So on top of all the different stability features I just mentioned, the women's version has that 3D space construction or kind of strategic internal geometry that collapses in a certain way to give even more stability. And because this is the Gel-Kayano, you actually have a small bit of pure gel directly underneath your heel. I'll put a video on the screen so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Now, personally, I can never feel this slab of pure gel, but according to ASICS, it's supposed to help with overall shock absorption. If we flip the shoe over to the outsole, we have a very familiar ASICS Kayano traction pattern. Something I did forget to mention is you do have rubber through the midfoot section, which adds to the stiffness of the shoe. And I will say this is a very stiff and rigid shoe. It does not want to flex, twist, or bend at all, which is another component that adds into that stability story. Funny enough, the forefoot is also fairly stiff despite it having those flex grooves, and it's even more stiff compared to something like the Nimbus, which is a pretty rigid shoe in general just because of how big the midsole is, but even the Nimbus has a lot more bend and flex to it. Now, I will say there are two different kinds of rubber here. You have the AHAR Plus, which is a harder, more durable rubber in the heel, and then ASICS Hybrid Grip, which is going to be kind of a stickier, grippier rubber. Thought it worked well. You just have a ton of surface area here and a fairly solid amount of rubber coverage with a fairly thick lug pattern. So how did this stability shoe perform? Well, the first thing you'll notice is it's rather large. It's pretty chunky, not the easiest to pick up the pace in. I think it works best for those steady state or easier runs. The other thing I'll say is you do notice that extra bit of foam in the forefoot, those 2 additional millimeters, I think actually do make a difference. You just feel the extra bit of cushioning towards the front and your foot isn't as angled in the shoe. I'll also say it's a fairly firm ride. Not all Flight Foam Blast Plus is created equal, especially when you compare it to something like the Nimbus, which I think has a slightly softer and bouncier experience. And speaking of the Nimbus, if you're someone who likes some stability, it's a fairly stable neutral shoe. Yes, it does have a little bit of bend to it, but it is fairly rigid overall. I really think the Kayano is for those that need a ton of support. Well, even though the Nimbus is a neutral shoe, I think it offers a decent level of guidance. So if you're someone who needs the most amount of support possible, especially on that medial side, I think this is going to be your friend. It's just going to have a firmer and less bouncy feel to it. I'll also say that the rocker geometry, very noticeable and pleasant, kind of keeps you moving along nicely, and that's because of how stiff this shoe is. There's no plate or anything like that. It's the firmer foam and all those components we talked about that I think add to the rigidity and help you take advantage of that rocker geometry. Well, that concludes the review. Let me know in the comments if you would rather go with the GT2000 or the Kayano for your stability. I would love to hear from you. I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.